So I subdivided up reality for you in one way. And so for the time being, we're done with that. Now I want to subdivide reality up in another way. Because you can't understand what's going on in the heroic and shamanic initiations and in the worldview that's encapsulated there, and the implication of that worldview for the understanding of phenomena like the unconscious and unconscious symbolism without looking at the world from one other perspective. So here's a decomposition of your computer, let's say. So first of all, we'll imagine your computer's working. And so then you might think, well, what is your computer when it's working? And then that's a hard question to ask, because it's, well, your keyboard, because you're clicking on the keyboard in all likelihood, and then there's the screen, or there's what's on the screen, because you're not actually looking at the screen, right? You're looking at what's on the screen, and it isn't even clear where that is. But the computer, while you're using it, sort of collapses itself down into what you're watching on the screen and what you're interacting with. That's the computer. And then all of a sudden, poof, it stops working. So you have an emotional response to that, right? Like the monkey who's just seen a jaguar. It upsets you. And the reason it upsets you is because you actually don't have a clue about your computer. And it either works, well, some of you more than others. It either works, and then it's a computer, or it doesn't work. In which case, God only knows what it is, or what you're going to do about it. So this is a good example of how what you understand can collapse into what you don't understand, because a computer turns out to be an unbelievably complicated thing. And it can fail for innumerable reasons. And if you want to fix it, then you have to take into account its insane complexity and start to piece it back together so that it starts to behave like the computer you want it to be, instead of like a, oblong rock. So, what do you have to do? Well, I represented the computer as that little black rectangle in the middle, and I expanded it down one level. So your computer is obviously full of subcomponents, right, of all sorts. Boards and chips and all the little things inside of it, electronic things, that all of which, when they work, you can ignore, but when they don't work, instantly constitute a whole nest of snakes. And so any of those subcomponents could have gone wrong. And then the subcomponents are made up of even smaller parts, of course, and any of those could go wrong. And then underneath that, there's the elemental properties that the microparts have to contend with in order to function. And sometimes weird things happen down there. So I don't know if you know this or not, but computer chips have now got so small that there's only some probability that the electrons that are flowing along a given wire will actually be in that wire. Because the uncertainty principle specifies that electron is probably here, but it might also be somewhere else. And at small enough levels of resolution, or high enough levels of resolution, that actually starts to become a problem. So the electrons can just get outside the wires, and that causes shorts. So probably your computer isn't failing because of some pathology at the quantum level of reality, but you never know. Micropart might be not working properly. A subcomponent might not be working properly. But there's other ways of considering the problem too. You might say, this is the last time I ever buy a compact computer. And then what you're doing is you're attributing the cause of its failure to act like a computer to the brand. And then you might say, well, I bought a computer from an economic system that's still somewhat pathological. So you might say, well, it's a Chinese part, for example. And as a consequence, the brand isn't reliable. And the reason the brand isn't reliable is because the economic system isn't reliable, and that's because the political system isn't reliable. So maybe the reason your computer doesn't function is because the political system that surrounds the manufacturer doesn't function well. So you ended up with a cheap part, and it doesn't work. And so all of those, as soon as your computer stops being what it is to you, which is the keyboard and the screen, or what's behind the screen, say, then all of a sudden it turns into all these other things that it could be. And in order to get it working like a computer again, or even to replace it, you have to contend with all of these other multiple levels of reality. So, there's two lessons from that. One is, well, that's why you get stressed when something stops working. It's because when it's working, it's doing what you want it to do. And that's what it is. The fact that it's doing what you want it to do defines what it is. But as soon as it stops working, God only knows what it is. Cars are like that, except they're even worse, because with a computer, you can usually just throw it away and replace it, and maybe that's a couple of $100. But maybe something went wrong with your car. Well, that's a complete bloody catastrophe, because not only does it not function as a car, now it's just a hunk of metal, but you have to take it to someone who you don't know to fix it, and who knows what they're going to do with it. Like, they might fix it, but they might not, or they might fix something that actually isn't wrong, or they might overcharge you, or, I mean, there's a whole rat's nest that's associated with having your car break down. And that tangles you right up. It's funny, because as soon as the car breaks down, then you have to contend with the whole culture that surrounds the car, and all of the pathology that might be embedded in that culture.